G'day, I'm Sam, a firefighter from Sydney, Australia. This year, I've been awarded a Churchill Fellowship to travel to the US and to Europe to research how mental skills training used by elite sports and the military could also be used by firefighters to unlock our performance under pressure. As firefighters, we feel a deep responsibility to be ready when people need us most. But I've experienced the pressures that can disrupt my senses, my motor skills, my decision making, and my focus. And that's why I turned to sports psychology. Skills like arousal control, adaptability, stress regulation, grounding, mindfulness, visualization, pre-performance routines, self-talk and self-reflection are just some of the proven strategies and skills that can improve my performance. And I've felt how these practices can make me calmer, more confident, and more effective in any situation. So this podcast is about sharing some of those lessons. We'll learn from athletes, soldiers, and firefighters who've mastered performance under pressure, as well as academics and the performance experts who can explain the neuroscience behind these skills. So join me as we explore mental skills and how they can make us stronger, safer, and better prepared to help others. So hello and welcome to the very first Mental Skills for Firefighters podcast. My name's Sam Monaghan, and next year through the Churchill Fellowship, I'll be travelling around the world to leading sports, firefighting, and military teams to investigate the use of sports psychology to improve human performance under pressure. I'll be investigating whether these skills could be employed by Australian firefighters to better improve our performance. So today on our first episode, we have Mark Dobson, AFSM. He is a station officer with Fire and Rescue New South Wales here in Sydney, where he's also acted as a wellbeing coordinator and leader. He's formerly of the Navy and was a Churchill Fellow himself in 2018. So today I thought he's the perfect guest to introduce this project, and we'll be looking at the Churchill Fellowship, what it is and the opportunities it presents for Australian researchers, my Churchill Fellowship project, where we'll be exploring mental skills training for firefighters, and we'll look at what are the pressures and stresses that firefighters are affected by, and introduce some of these skills that I hope to learn more about through this podcast series and my research project. Mark, thank you for joining us, and thank you for hosting our first episode of the Mental Skills for Firefighters podcast. But before I hand over that hosting duty to you, I hope to just introduce yourself. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself from your career in the Navy? You're a firefighter, you've been a leader in our wellbeing space, and now you're combining all of that into a business called Ordinary Courage. Mark, there's a lot to you. Give us the quick.
Yeah, so I've been a firefighter in fire rescue for 23 years now. And before that, I was in the Navy. And when about 12 years ago, I got into the mental health space of fire and rescue. I worked as the wellbeing coordinator. And on that journey, it made me think a little bit back about how much I've kind of been involved in the mental health space. And I thought back to my time in the Navy, and my role in the Navy was a physical training instructor. And as a physical training instructor, your job was to obviously look after the fitness of the crews of ships, but you also had a lot to do with the morale, and morale was, pretty well has been the word for mental health, I suppose, how the crew's traveling, how their appetite for hard work and things like that. So I deployed to the Middle East during the first Gulf War in 1990. And on my warship, I was 24 at the time, but I was a pretty senior person in my sort of space. And so it's a bit of a steep learning curve. I had some 17, 18, 19-year-old young men. It was only men on the warship at the time. And, although they signed up for the military, they weren't really thinking about going to war. And some of them had been in the Navy less than a year. So it was a bit of a daunting time for them. So I spent a fair bit of time just looking for opportunities to engage with them and just seeing how they're traveling and, giving them a little bit of positive feedback. And I suppose that's kind of what I've done with, throughout my career, and that's what I worked as a wellbeing coordinator. I mental health is over time has become a lot more recognised and structured. So my time in fire rescue was around writing policies and procedures and building up the peer support team and working with the University of New South Wales to find best practice approaches to supporting, emergency workers. But and I didn't really think about that until I reflected back. And then that sort of led me on. I've also do a fair bit of work with an organisation called Disaster Relief Australia, which is a volunteer organisation. It's a veteran-led organisation, so it has, and we do support communities after disasters pretty well. So we go in after the first responders, usually a week or two after an incident, and we support the community on the kickoff of their recovery. So sometimes we spend 3 or 4 months in a community, really connecting with the members of the community and supporting them so that they can get back on their feet as quickly as possible. One of the things that I noticed in that organisation was, how useful it was to have veterans deploying on those operations, because you get fit, young military people who are looking for that sense of purpose, and we definitely provide it for them. But one of the challenges was getting young military people, veterans interested in that, and I think a lot of people, when they leave the military, they're they're looking for what's next. And so I did a Churchill Fellowship, Veterans and Volunteering, and it was about how agencies or organizations in the US really connected with their veterans and got them into the volunteering space. So I toured the US and met with some organizations that do just that. Team Rubicon was the first one, and another one was called The Mission Continues, and there was another one called Team Red, White and Blue. And the interesting thing about that was that I kind of went over saying, hey, how do I, what can I learn, and how can I take these learnings back to Australia, to disaster relief, to get volunteers, to, get more young volunteers. And what I found is that my Churchill Fellowship changed a little bit. And I think anybody that's done a Churchill Fellowship, they find that it changes a little bit. And I suppose it probably makes sense to have a little pause here and just kind of explain what a Churchill Fellowship is for the non-initiated.
Yes, I would love you to do that.
Yeah, perfect. So a Churchill Fellowship is a fellowship which provides financial support to individuals who want to go overseas and meet people face to face to research a question or a problem that exists in Australia. One of the things that Winston Churchill was famous for, he thought that you could get so much more done face to face than you can remotely. So he was a big advocate of ensuring people, sit down and meet and discuss, and so that's why the fellowship has his name, and that's why it's about travel and connecting with people. So you get financially supported to travel overseas and meet and come up with some different solutions and different perspectives about the problem that you're discussing. So mine was veteran and volunteering, and I spent some time over in the US. And, as Sam has been awarded a Churchill Fellowship just recently, and it's a very, very exciting opportunity. And I congratulate him on that. And I think it's one of the great experiences. But as I was saying, you kind of start with how you wanted the fellowship to progress, but then once you start meeting with people, as Winston Churchill suggested, your perceptions and your attitudes and your ways of thinking change a little bit. So I actually came back with more of a focus on voluntary leadership than I did about veterans. So I remember I had a meeting with the COO of Team Red, White and Blue, and he was talking about his model, which is they have platoon commanders that organise military veterans to do sporting events, and sporting and exercise is a big part of a military person's life. So doing that as a veteran makes perfect sense. And he said that his platoon leaders, the great ones, are ones that not just hang around with the people whose company they enjoy, but they are people that look for the people that might be on the fringes. He said the best one he knows about was a guy that used to walk out into the car park and see someone sitting in their car thinking about coming in and joining the group to go for a run, tap on the window and say, hey, I'm Mark, I'm tipping you're here to go for a run with us. Let's come and introduce you to the people. Whereas I'm certain everyone's had that experience where you're going to something new, and it's a bit daunting and a bit scary. And if you didn't have that sort of bridge to get you into it, then it didn't work so well. That's kind of really informed my way of thinking around how much of an impact coalface leaders can have on individuals just by making that, effort to connect. And I think that's a huge part of how I see my role in fire and rescue as a station officer, and what my consultancy does. It's, exercising or encouraging coalface leaders to have courage, just the ordinary courage, to reach out and connect with people. And it's, that's kind of how the Churchill Fellowship kind of evolved into my consultancy and evolved into how I lead people in fire and rescue, I suppose.
Beautiful, mate. I really love what you're saying there. I love what you're suggesting about the Churchill Fellowship being a project that is a research project. So we've got an idea and we're thinking that we're trying to move in this direction, but let's get face to face. Let's get in the room with the right people and we'll see where that direction changes. I love that story and the anecdote of the leader finding the person on the fringe. And again, if I'm looking at mental skills training, you can feed the hungry, you can feed the people who are after it, but also identifying the people who need it and the people who would benefit, whether they know it or not, is the excitement and is the opportunity to make an impact. So look, I really appreciate that intro from you, mate, and I appreciate your support in leading a conversation today. Like you mentioned, I've been successful in being awarded a Churchill Fellowship where I'll travel later in 2026. So yeah, I appreciate your chance to let me kind of explain what I'm doing here.
No, it's a great achievement. I think a lot of people don't understand that, so thousands of people apply for a Churchill Fellowship, and it's a pretty grueling process that you've just finished, where you've got to present your ideas in little. They said, there's a 15-minute opportunity to present, and they say, we're going to get you get to present for 2 minutes. I'm going to ask you questions for 13 minutes, and you go, 2 minutes? How do I get my story into 2 minutes? And it's just thinking about that is a challenge in itself. So well done.
Thank you.
All right, so if I'm going to take over now and be the podcast host, and going to ask you now, Sam, to explain, a little bit about what your fellowship's about, but also a little bit about you. So let's start with you and just talk about your career and what brought you here.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. So I've also been a firefighter, and time's raced by where I've now been a firefighter for 15 years. And I guess time's raced by because I just love every minute of it. I've always enjoyed coming to work, and at work I'm excited by the opportunity to have a positive impact. So I've been chasing kind of the jobs, chasing the busy stations, and with that goes chasing the opportunities to be trained both in rescue work, in urban search and rescue work, and now I've been promoted to that rank of station officer. So in Australia, that means I'm riding in the front seat during my shift. I'll be acting as the incident manager at the jobs I go to. And then I guess at station level, I'm coordinating my shift. I'm organising the training and development of the staff, leading that community engagement piece, familiarising ourselves with local buildings and hazards, and just making sure we're the best kind of partner we can be for our local community. I guess beyond firefighting, I felt like you, it was important to be trained as a peer support volunteer and to work in our wellbeing space. And that's not only because it gives us the ability to support our mates, but I think that training and awareness I have as a result of working in that space and in relation to working in the emergency services where we have trauma and challenging incidents, that's been a really important protective factor for me. I want to have a long career doing what I want. I certainly don't want to bring home any kind of negative aspects of that job to my home. So I think wellbeing's been a protective factor for me. But looking at mental skills training has also been a bit of a journey, and it's led me to apply for and luckily be successful for this fellowship. So I guess with that excitement and that desire to go to those more impactful, high consequence incidents comes a bit of pressure. And I certainly felt that. I felt a responsibility to perform. We talk about being there to help people on the worst day of their lives. And like most firefighters, that did give me a great sense of job satisfaction, but it also came with that responsibility to perform well. And so preparation, it's always been like a high need for me. I needed to kind of reduce that anxiety. And also I felt during jobs, like creeping in the negative effects of that pressure at jobs, and that pressure that doesn't exist in the training environment. So I can remember, going to a pretty dynamic house fire with someone trapped inside. And in reflection, I found I probably didn't listen to the instructions that I was given. I don't think I even heard properly the information that I was given. I remember making a door entry, and I found, I really noticed it was a lot harder than what I'd prepared for. Like, this was a pretty basic skill for me. And And that definitely didn't go very smoothly. Similarly, at a motor vehicle rescue, I can remember my hand shaking. I was just trying to disconnect some battery terminals, and I just couldn't do it. And I guess like this was an initial introduction to me that there's a huge variability in my performance on the fire ground. And after poor performance, I found that really knocked my confidence. And I was pretty lucky. I had the ability to kind of self-reflect on it. I could see the errors for what they were. Like, it wasn't that I was a bad firefighter. I could see, what had gone wrong, and I could gain experience over time and gain slowly that ability to slow myself down and do things properly. But I guess that's, where it did kind of lead me to search out these solutions in sports psychology.
Mm. And I'll jump.
Yep.
Just before you go, I was going to jump in there, Sam. And I think one of the things that you're exercising there is, like any sort of good performance, a lot of people look at someone who does it easily and think, oh, that's just an organic skill. But what you don't understand is the work and the effort that goes in behind those skills. And every good outcome has got some sort of curation behind it. You've practiced and you've prepared and you've thought about it. And I think when I look at good firefighters, I see the same thing. They look like they've mastered their skill, but it's only because they've done that work in the background. And just you talking about, the need for that is really important. Yeah, so I suppose we're just talking now how this links into a Churchill Fellowship and how you ended up with where you are now.
Yeah. Well, I think that crossover for me, I realised that the sports psychologist definitely had, the right science on it. And I guess when I'd looked at the Churchill Fellowship and I looked at people like you, Mark, who'd gone out and made that application, it seemed like the Churchill Fellowship was a great way to travel and look at what skills are being employed by other people around the world. I think in the, field of human performance, there's been a huge investment, obviously, in elite sports, but also in the military. And then looking at that neuroscience of human performance and how we can get, athletes and military and persons to achieve that high performance without that variability that the stress adds into what we need to do. When I was looking at the application for the Churchill Fellowship, I did come across a quote from Winston Churchill. He says, "To each of us, there comes a time in their life, a special moment when they're tapped on the shoulder and offered that chance to do something very special, unique to them and to their talents. And what a tragedy it would be if that moment finds them unprepared or unqualified for what might have been their finest hour." And when I read that, I just thought, wow, that speaks to firefighters. Absolutely. We are, trying to serve and act in the public interest. And we're constantly called on to do very special things and difficult things. And it is a grave responsibility that we have to prepare ourselves. So that's, I guess, the link to the Churchill Fellowship and the opportunity to travel and to visit those fire services, military and sports, to see what is the world's best practice.
Can you just explain how pressure might negatively affect firefighters?
Yeah. And that's the question, because I guess the challenge of firefighting is very unique. We're dealing with danger. We've got incomplete information. We have rapidly changing conditions. We've got teams that we're working with that we might have or we might not have worked with before. And that risk of poor performance in these moments is of high consequence. And because I think our body and our nervous system is always scanning for that perception of danger, it'll constantly want to trigger that automatic stress response, whether we're aware of it or whether we're not aware of it. If you think of a firefighter and the bells go off, initial information comes through about the incident, we're hearing potentially even just the change pitch of the station officer's voice, that driver who's using the horn a bit extra or taking that corner a bit faster. And these are all signals. Your crewmates just bit rushed, and our bodies are picking up on all of those cues, and it's preparing like that caveman response to the perception of this danger. And if it's left unchecked, we know the biophysical results will be that stress response, the flight, fight, freeze response. And in this podcast series, we do want to explore what these pressures will bring. But I think the science is quite clear that the acute stress response will include narrowing our vision or reducing to tunnel vision. It might block out our hearing. It can disrupt the fine motor skills that I mentioned affected me. It can be harder to make decisions. We might lose track of time or even our situational awareness. And these are things that we do not want happening in the middle of a fire ground. We don't want them happening at a rescue. And if it goes unchecked, it probably will have a negative impact on our performance. And that's all a stress response before we've jumped out of a truck. So at jobs, during jobs, we know things don't always go to plan. We're going to have things go wrong, be it a king toes, a blocked hydrant, unexpected lock gate, or your comms message is not going through. And it's easy to see how that stress might compound. And if we don't manage that, it'd be unfair to expect anyone, no matter how experienced as a firefighter, to kind of just magically perform to a high level in that environment. And what we might expect is like a pretty high level of variability in the performance of these individuals in relation to that stress. So I think, in fairness, if we're drilling our body for operations, we should be drilling our minds. I think with the knowledge that we have about performance stress, we've got a responsibility to prepare our minds for the challenge that we expect to face.
I think that's a really good point. I think one of the things that I've experienced in these situations is there's a lot of factors that you can't control. So if you can spend some time mastering the things that you can control, then the outcomes have to improve. When you think this is these sorts of responses, you think they're common in firefighters, and are fireys using some of these skills already?
Yeah, I think firefighters do use these skills. And as I mentioned, the drive to kind of be prepared, to be called into the unknown, that's a responsibility that all firefighters carry and treat very seriously. And I think firefighters do have a natural ability to control themselves. I think firefighters are aware enough of the stress response that they want to reduce its effect. And so if I think about the experienced firefighters that mentored and taught me, probably without formally naming these skills, they were skilled at slowing themselves down. They showed me tricks like counting windows of a building and counting doors. And that was a good process to size up a building at a building fire. But it was also a really small, achievable task that allowed them to kind of slow themselves down. In a truck on the way to a job, they'd use humor to stay relaxed. And there might be music or smiling kind of used as an intentional tool just to stay in a good performance state. I know from the incident management side of things, and whether it be the assessments or the real life events, incident management is one of the really stressful and overwhelming aspects of the job. And I'd see a lot of my colleagues using that mental rehearsal or the visualization practice to better prepare themselves for what could be, a very overwhelming event. And so what I want to do is to kind of research and talk to the right groups and ask how to formalize these skills, how to take that theory from the evidence and bring it into kind of engaging practices that firefighters can be aware of that their skills and develop over time. And I guess the aim at the end of the day is quite simple. It's to have a truck full of firefighters that we know can be calm, confident, be adaptable, be prepared to changes and challenges at a job, and who can filter information, stay focused, but still make good decisions at a job despite everything changing around them and despite a very stressful environment. This is a deliberate practice that I think we can improve.
Yeah, that sounds definitely beneficial. So, what are some examples of some mental skills training?
So as I said, I think mental skills training is developed and pioneered by sports psychology, and now it's been used by the military, doctors, pilots, people who've got to be disciplined in events of high consequence. And these are some skills that we can practice. And so straight away, we've got an opportunity to take action, and that's helpful for firefighters because firefighters do want to take actions and practice things. So I think the skills that we're looking at are really broad, and they cover kind of a range of opportunities that each individual can see what they might want to use or might work for them. But if we break them down, I think we've got like attention and focus controls. So looking at filtering distractions, triaging information, being able to lock in and focus on the elements of the task that we can control. We can have a tactical reset as a skill, and that's being able to just kind of pause and go back and be really intentional and reassess the information and the actions that are occurring and decide what the next best action is for us. I think another skill is stress regulation, so interrupting that stress response that I've talked about. Obviously, recognizing you're having that stress response and then recognizing how to manage your own personal responses to it. And that kind of goes back to station land as well. We want to be able to down regulate after an exciting dynamic fire event. And we want to even further down regulate when we go back to work, go back to at home, because we don't need to be in that heightened state of awareness at a home life. I think other skills, adaptability, mental flexibility, like I said, being able to shift mindset, being able to respond and adapt to information as it comes. I love to learn about confidence being a skill, learning that our perception of confidence isn't a set state, but it's something that we can be very active and intentional, and we can use it as a function that we can either build up or be aware that it might be eroded if we let certain stimuli to erode it. Another skill is just awareness of your performance state. So we're thinking about that Olympic athlete and they're on the big stage. And when they're there after all of their preparation, they would know what their best state is. They would know what it feels like in their body, but also in their mind, their emotions. And the cool thing they know how to do is they know how to access that state. So they know how to bring themselves into that perfect performance state. And that leads to skills like pre-performance routines, self-talk. There might be physical cues and triggers that you can use, again, before an event or even during an event to kind of bring you back into that perfect state. We've got reflection strategies. And so learning how do I function best, looking at mistakes and detaching from those mistakes and appraising setbacks as opportunities to grow. A great question to ask in self-reflection is, does this mistake define me? Or is this mistake something that I can learn from? And as I said, I'm the first to have made lots of mistakes, and having that ability to detach from it has been an important reflective practice for me. And finally, we've got skills of grounding practices. So this would be things like mindfulness, breath work, visual refocusing. You can have progressive muscle relaxation, counting. These are skills that could be embedded throughout all those other ones I've mentioned. And I think these are the ones that we are teaching already to firefighters. And it's great to see that we've got breathwork practices and mindfulness practices already been used by firefighters. And again, we want to integrate them further into our training.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary. Thanks, Sam. And I think that the interesting thing is when we're talking about firefighters exercising a bit of insight and introspection, it sounds like a new age fireys for some of us, I think, but that's good to hear that, fireys are starting to adopt some of these practices that really will make them perform better. So that's a great thing. Now, is this just about mental health or is it about other types of performance as well?
No, this project is looking at improving our performance, and a challenge of this application and this project has been looking at, you're teaching mental skills that must be to do with mental health. And yes, there will be mental health outcomes, but what we're trying to do is use sports psychology skills to improve the performance of firefighters. And then as a secondary outcome of that, we would expect, yes, there'll be mental health outcomes. Firefighters are going to feel more prepared. They're going to feel less anxious about those pressure-filled environments that they know are coming up. They're going to be able to better regulate their emotion and stress response during those incidents, and they're going to be able to down-regulate their emotions and stress response after those. And I guess by improving our performance, we would expect improved confidence and also the better feeling of preparedness. So a general reduction in anxiety.
So that's the purpose of your Churchill, but what's the purpose of this podcast? What are you hoping to get out of this?
Yeah, so I think a series of recorded discussions goes a long way to introducing the project, explain the concepts both to our internal audience of firefighters, training staff and the decision makers, but also to the wider Australian firefighting community. Most of the information I consume is from podcasts and audiobooks. So whether it be driving or exercising, I hope these conversations are an accessible way for firefighters just to have a listen to what we're working on. And it's a great opportunity to record these conversations. In our organisation, we've got this amazing staff. We've got Olympians and professional sports players and firefighters from elite military backgrounds. And we're hearing their stories and how they employed those skills, which were taught more formally in those backgrounds, and whether they can be translated into a firefighting practice. So I'll also try to speak to academics, performance experts, who can kind of add that theory and rigour to these ideas we're speaking about. And the second reason we're doing a podcast here is that I have lined up some great individuals and organisations to speak to when I travel next year. But this episode and series is a call out to international sports teams, coaches, military, fire services, performance experts and academics who may be willing to kind of open their doors for me to visit and have a look at the programs they've introduced, the practices that have worked or not worked, how they've implemented their plans and how they've engaged their staff with these skills and what benefits they've seen. I'd love to collaborate with you. So if you're open for a visit in the next year, please let me know and we'll make it work. Hey, so Mark, thanks so much for being the host of today's podcast in our first episode of Mental Skills for Firefighters podcast. I guess to wrap up, what we want to do in this series is ask all of our guests, if you have a great resource, podcast, book, or thought or quote you'd like to share that you think relates to our project.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's two areas spring to mind. The first is a book by Sebastian Junger. I don't know if you've read it, called Tribe. And I really liked it because it was quite clearly outlined the importance of that collective group, and I think at fire stations and in my military experience, I really experienced that. And when those sorts of connections have been lacking, I've noticed it. So I think, anybody gets an opportunity to read Sebastian Junger's book, Tribe, I'd say definitely read that. And the other thing is I've been listening to a podcast by Scott Galloway. He does what's called a Prof G podcast, and he's been talking a lot around men and how they can be good role models for young men and other men. And I think, you're a great example of this. I think if you're out there kind of demonstrating some of these skills and working on your self-improvement and sharing it with people, that's a great example of what he's talking about. So I think, one of the things I think we've lost a little bit is the opportunities for good male role models in the community. So, I think it's great to have you reaching out and doing this. And I think some of your findings will be really useful when we get back. So well done.
Amazing. That's very kind of you to mention. But they're two great resources, and we'll definitely be looking to build a little library of resources there. On that book Tribe, I might piggyback on the back of that, and in much the same way, if listeners, especially international listeners, wanted to check out the book Owen Eastwood called Belonging, they'll get a very similar definition of team culture and tribes, and the importance of belonging and generating a share in organisations before we can expect much else from excellent teams. Mark, thanks so much for being host, being guests on the very first podcast. We'll look back on today in a couple of episodes' time and have a laugh about creating this. But I appreciate your time, and I'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sam. Best of luck for your Churchill. Really, really great to see that you're getting out there in the field and doing something. So well done, mate. And I look forward to tracking these podcasts and getting some updates.
All right, good on you, mate. Thank you. Thanks very much. So that's it for episode 1. Thanks very much to Mark. I'm not sure if it's been too obvious, but that's the first bit of content I've produced. So hopefully this improves as we go. I've put links to the project, to the books and resources that we mentioned to start our book list. Now, I'm always happy to talk to anyone and hear from you. So please send through comments, suggestions, ideas, and I'm always happy to respond to those. We'll plan to have another episode out shortly. So if you're interested, please like or follow wherever you found this episode, and make sure to share it with a friend. So once again, thanks for your time. Stay safe and be well.